Welcome back to ARKAT Talks, joined by my co-host Ahmed Al Mulla and myself, Fatma Al Khayat. Today's episode takes a deeper dive into a concept we often hear, livability. So what makes a city truly livable, and more importantly, for whom? To explore this, we're honored to be joined by Olivia Duncan. Olivia is a leading urban designer, researcher, and strategist whose work centers around urban identity, public space, and inclusion in the Gulf. She is heavily involved in the Livability program in Abu Dhabi, and she brings both lived insight and design expertise to this conversation. So we'll talk about everything from data to design, to belonging, to beauty, and how we can build cities that are not just smart, but deeply human.
Olivia, welcome.
Thank you.
Very happy to
We're
have you
so
with us.
excited to have you.
Super excited.
All right, so we'll dive right in, Olivia. Since you've worked extensively on defining livability, we're curious to know, how do you personally define livability, especially in the Gulf context? What does it mean for people here today? And if you could also touch on the blind spots of applying Western livability indices such as walkability or commute to hyper-local contexts such as suburban Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, that's
A fully loaded question,
Yeah,
I know.
like three
We'll
questions
break
in
it.
one.
We'll break it down. So, how do you
start to
personally define
yeah.
livability?
I think, I think I want to start saying that I cannot define livability. And as a researcher, I started looking at how is the West defining livability? Why livability is now an interesting and fashionable topic in terms of like urban strategy and city making. And what I found out, it's very great, Fatma, that you started livable for whom. So when you start defining, and I found out this idea that the Western societies like to define and have these verticals, that are not integrated. We find that there is not one solution for all.
Of course.
So in my opinion, right, in my professional and also personal opinion, because we can't separate them, I find that livability is about giving choice to people, right? So defining each person's roles and responsibilities in this conversation. And it is when I was presenting on a Livable Cities conference last year in London, and I was deeply irritated by all of the presentations that started, because everybody's talking about livability from an economist, the Global Livability Index perspective, and relying on this really kind of corporate business way of defining the term and defining what it means.
Very technical.
Very technical, yes, but also very one-sided. And all
what
of
do
these.
You mean by that one-sided?
Like one-sided. For instance, the economist is looking at averages of different rankings and scores, and then putting together. And they become very dangerous scores because
they dilute a lot of things.
They dilute. Perfect. So this idea of dilution, for me, it's dangerous in this context of livability. And it could be livable, it could be lovable. Now we heard in Abu Dhabi Summit. So there's all these upcoming terms. But in academia, which I'm also involved with, that also has its own limitations, right? So we have all of these limiting belief systems that are being isolated and not conversing and collaborating together. So you have academia saying we need people to participate. Yeah, but since when people participate in a capitalist system, right? So the participation is always limited, right? So, so the academics are talking about caring cities, happy cities, thriving cities. And then you have the economists and the Bloombergs and all of these kind of, different world government forums. And, this audience, different audiences want to listen to livability from their own perspective. And as someone who's looking at all that, and I have a privilege, a huge privilege to be involved in this, it is an amazing program, whether it's called Livability and, thriving, caring, quality of life and well-being and happy cities. Like it doesn't
20-minute cities. Livability has a lot of hats.
There's so many hats. And I think in the 80s, so when I started my master's in sustainable urban development, we were talking about sustainability, right? It's just another term.
Buzzwords,
right? So these buzzwords. So livability is the buzzword of now. And it's okay, right? Like if we just ignore, what is the essence? What is the ethos of livability? It's about giving people the choice, but also asking governments and regulators, right? And every aspect of society needs to be accountable for humans. And now we're starting as well. Another buzzword is planet positive and nature positive ideas, right? So climate change is it's not a new thing, guys, but we're coming together, and it depends on the context that you're living in. So I'll go to your second question, that it's GCC context, right?
Exactly.
So I've been here for, mashallah, I've been here for 16 years or more, like 16 plus. I grew up in Brazil, and then I moved to New Zealand. So I'm Brazilian, I'm Maori, so I'm very proud with my, indigenous heritage. And I think the way I relate to land and to urban development has been a huge journey after I finished all of my education, my formal westernized education. So what happened to me is, in my PhD program, which is in London, right? So it's like the old empire, like looking down at, the indigenous. So when I went there, and I was really interested in decolonizing the way in which I do research and decolonizing the way in which I look at my practice. So if I am humble enough to call myself, that's not very humble to call yourself an expert, but we are all experts at something. And I think once you start to critically analyze your expertise, I found out that there was a lot of troublesome outlook for me as a Brazilian, New Zealander, Western educated professional to being here in the GCC and being treated as an expert, right?
Right.
So my research then I started. It's a very painful research process. I gotta admit, because it's you need to kind of look at oneself. Like one needs to look at oneself and challenge.
Yes, and question all your beliefs.
On your belief system, and what do you think is good, and what are you selling? How are you selling yourself? Like, I'm the expert of this. Call me in. I'll make sure that I will sell you a formula that is tested in a different context.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So going back to the question, GCC context, who is here? Who makes the decisions, and who benefits from the decisions, and who participates? So certain questions are not relevant here.
Yeah.
And in the process of me trying to work with Emirati women, so ultimately, what is my research trying to look at? Is Abu Dhabi a livable city for Emirati women? So because I've been fortunate to be working with Emiratis, I've had Emirati bosses, Emirati best friends. So I'm just privileged to be immersed in the culture. And I was able to look at Emirati women in particular and understand the power that they have in a very nuanced way. So when you see these indices, right, again, they're important for different reasons, but not for today's conversation, I would like to argue. That, you have United Nations looking at gender, parity. You have women's and girls movements that are saying, let's patriarchal systems and so on. But I think with Emirati women, they are embedded in society in such a powerful way. And I read many papers. I'm going to anthropologists, to social scientists.
How do you think they're involved in what roles do they play?
I think they're as a Western outlook. We read it, so there's a lot of publications saying, the Western outlook is they're covered, they're repressed, they don't participate. They participate a lot in the household, right? So I think there's a private versus public space in the built environment in this context that needs to come up as a conversation, even in livability, right? So when I was spending time, and I had an amazing, I was very fortunate to be invited into female majlis, and I sat with grandmothers, and it's all intergenerational. So when you sit with different generations,
how was that experience?
That was just, so what the grandmother believes and dreams about and defines for herself what livability means is very different than her granddaughter. So we have a granddaughter going to the moon, right? And the first Emirati woman to go to the moon on a NASA kind of effort mission, I forgot now the mission's name. She's not only going outside of her neighborhood, she's outside of the, wanting to go outside of the planet. You see the scale, right? Yeah. And when I speak to her grandma, and in terms of livability for her in Abu Dhabi, she believes maybe a respectable woman wouldn't be leaving her house without a real need to leave. So if I were to wear my former, westernized training and outlook, I would be, how do I decolonize my...
completely misunderstand.
I would have totally misunderstood. Exactly. I would be just like, oh my God, no, you're repressed. You can leave your house. Who am I to kind of qualify her as someone who should be participating in the public life? So the notions and definitions of livability and participation of community in the public sphere, right, in the public realm, where do people come together in a Western city
Yeah.
It's very different than where people come together and
Exactly.
participate in the GCC.
Absolutely.
Because I was just going to say, because, you know, touching on the story in specific and about the grandmother, she definitely probably had a role to play even in the public life, but in a different way.
Very
way.
different.
In a different way. But because especially the woman here played a massive role in terms of managing public spaces
Absolutely.
and families and children and whatnot, because especially a lot of their husbands used to go away for pearl diving.
Exactly.
So who are the ones who used to stay behind to look after the city? It was the women.
Absolutely.
So in
Everything.
fact, exactly. So they played, but it's not at the scale of her granddaughter where she left the planet. But it shaped the urban form, the way we interact, the way we, you know,
And the
Totally.
resilience of the people, because they
Yes.
were role models. So what's happening now with these livability, you know, indices and scores?
Yeah.
Who's the future, right? It's the children. The children are looking at their moms and dads. Okay, the dads are also there.
the
But, you know,
segregation actually happened after the urbanization,
Yeah.
in fact. So everything that you're discussing is actually values that have been applied in the past that we're finding are very important that we need to bring back
Yeah.
to create these sustainable environments where we can
Absolutely.
foster the social interaction, and then we can, you know, advocate for livability and positive psychology and positive living.
And I love that you touched
Yeah.
on Emirati women because this leads us perfectly into the next question.
Exactly. So again, you've explored how Emirati women, right, perceive urban space in your PhD work. What does this tell us about inclusion and designing cities that reflect local identity and belonging, not just globally accepted metrics?
it's a hard one. I know I should have prepared for this one, but I just wanted to.
You've got enough knowledge.
I know. It's just that when you try like to answer a question in terms of identity, I also struggled. So it took me 3 years to accept. Again, I started our chat saying that I can't define livability. I have hints here and there, you know, but it's a super complex thing. But also to define urban identity for Emirati women in particular, which we have here an anomaly where the indigenous people have a lot of power, which is very exciting because it's not the, you know, it's not the norm in other countries.
Right.
And, you know, so we have this anomaly, which is super interesting, and I'm very excited for the Emirati population that can build up on what, you know, the visionary and the leadership has created for the society. But I think I came to terms that I couldn't, like the fluidity of this identity is so complex for Emirati women. I also am exploring having limits to my research. So I kind of start saying I can't define Emirati women. I cannot. Because they are, it's just so, like, I cannot define even myself, right? Am I Brazilian? Am I New Zealander? I don't look Maori, but I have DNA.
I can completely relate to that
right,
with my multicultural background.
So we are all, right?
Yeah, but defining identity in general is quite subjective.
Super
I
subjective.
think exactly.
Yeah.
So I think you need to break down in terms of what are the metrics that you're going to use in terms of wanting to break down what identity is.
So I'll just tell you a story about my research, which I wanted to fail fast. I love saying this because people are scared of the you know, to use the word failure. But I failed quickly when I was trying to look at some of the Islamic cities ideas, you know, brought up by the American Palestinian sociologist. Of course, I'm not going to remember her name, but we can, you know, Lina.
We'll find it.
Yeah.
So she wrote about Islamic cities. Yeah, thank you. So she talked about, you know, the private and public separation. So all of that identity is happening at a scale of what I mentioned, the two worlds that kind of combine, right? So at which space in your home is the most private space and then I found out through my interviews that it's actually one's bathroom, so a woman's bathroom, not even the bedroom, right? So it's like the most private space is the bedroom. And how do you navigate from your bedroom outside of your house? How many semi-public spaces do you need to cross? And all of these, you know, these membranes, these imaginary membranes that are full of pressure, right? So I started my research like this, and all of the anthropologists, again, I'm not an expert, I'm trained architect working with urban strategy. And they just killed the idea because it was like 280s, 290s. There's no such thing. This has been debunked. You know, the veil, the covering, like people are obsessed about that in the West, right?
Yeah.
So I had to kind of drop that. I'm like, no problem. This is a hot spot. I'm not going to navigate into here. Let's go back to build.
Of course, there are deeper things as well.
Super deep, and I haven't had the training, and you know, and I'm being humble about it. Like, okay, maybe I shouldn't touch this. I need 2-3 years of just kind of, you know, digging deep into into anthropology and social science. So I allowed myself to move away from that. And things that we can always rely on is the non-negotiables from the region and from Abu Dhabi, right? Which is climate. Climate, we cannot, and I love how I attended some of your lectures, you guys always talk about it, right? So we cannot ignore the fact that the technology that was used earlier created different spaces, created different interactions based on the available technology of the time, right? If you don't have AC, so the whole world, the whole GCC changed pre-AC, after AC. I mean, just architecture, the impact on architecture and, building materials.
On our built environment, on our lives, on our social interactions,
Completely, right? And I mean, I'm being simplistic. It's not just that, it's many other things. But going back to urban identity and women, so is really the force to how do we cover our women, right? Because when they were out there, they were doing the commerce, right? They were running the show while men were away. So if the men no longer go away, so you see how economics, which we are not trained as architects and urban strategists, we also don't have know-how on how to truly understand the system that is put in place with the global competitiveness, right? Competitiveness, that we need to bring back this understanding how it's deeply affecting the way we relate to each other. So again, another way of defining livability is about relationship. It is about psychology. It starts in your childhood, how you're treated by your parents. So if one parent is out, for 6 months and you only have one caretaker, that also has an impact, right?
Totally, yeah.
So there's all of these different complex terms or factors. Thank you. So the factors are coming together, and then when I speak, finally, when I ran some interviews, Emirati women say they're globalized now. So again, I'm just, as a Western, I'm like, no, let's be cute and traditional, and you're different, you wear an abaya. No, you're global. That's right. There is a constant erasing of this uniqueness, this regional identity, and people like you guys. So if you can bring this together and you can defend this in a way that we must not forget our individuality. I know we're speaking English now, but I mean, there's many different cultures, many different languages that we should be, really trying to preserve and resist the erasure of this homogeneous force that is becoming. And
this is just one of the many effects of globalization, right? Because it's not just identities, it's also our architecture, our cities, the way we live. It's all becoming very, very homogeneous.
Very homogeneous and very dangerous. I find it really dangerous. So Livability has the opportunity to safeguard what works here. So when I was in, I was saying, this Livable Cities in London's conference, they were talking about, so livability is about counting how many trees or amount of green open space. Why? This doesn't work here in this context, right? Going back and forth. Exactly. So we need to leverage on using the challenges that are here to kind of creating your own space and your own kind of innovative. It's a test bed. If the whole planet is going to increase, the temperature is going to increase, we should be leading here in Abu Dhabi or in,
because we have the most
right.
So where they're going to be impacted the most. And I mean, exactly on that point, Olivia, in your opinion, what are the biggest misconceptions about livability in fast developing cities like Abu Dhabi or Riyadh or just GCC in general?
I think there is a lingering promise from the 20th century that all of us are architects here. We've been trained to believe that if we build infrastructure, we are solving a social problem. There's a promise of reformation of a character. This is the modernist idea, which is obviously done by, men and white men, European white men. So, how are we moving on from this? We are the 21st century generation, and then, what's next for us? So we need to kind of accept as architects and built environment professionals that we must collaborate, right? And so to answer to your question, we must collaborate with other sciences. We must collaborate with I don't want to use the word experts because then I'm contradicting myself, but there's a lot of knowledge.
Of course, it's a
out
multidisciplinary
effect. Always. Exactly. Absolutely, always. And then if you ask again your question, it's about what are the misconceptions, right?
About livability in the region. But I love, because the first point you touched on, the myth that livability is, for example, cutting edge infrastructure. That is so true. So what are other misconceptions?
Well, again, like they were saying, Europeans are forcing other contexts to measure livability per their lenses, which
100%.
works in a place where you don't need to irrigate your vegetation. That's why you have all these trees, because it's a natural part where you're located on
and
the
then
planet.
when we're compared to our green space per capita,
That's right.
we score really low, but at the same time we're a desert, you know. So it's
So how do you compare? And then when I challenged, we got the Economist, the Global Livability guys, and of course they're not going to share the methodology, but I challenged them. I'm like, you guys have the same methodology for 30 years, and how are you justifying?
And they're based. It's a Western-led.
Absolutely, right. So yes, it's
and they apply
London.
the methodology on
the whole planet, right?
Oh,
so they're
okay.
ranking, they've been measuring, they've been Abu Dhabi and Dubai are not the top 10.
Yeah.
But if you look at the top, I've lived in one of the most livable cities, right? So Auckland, for instance, I lived there in New Zealand. You always have Vienna, Copenhagen. They're always up there, right? But why, right? It's because look at the density. Why are you not looking at it? You can't compare. You can't compare the different densities, the different social problems, the history. So anyway,
the culture, the environment,
the culture, and everything.
The weather.
But I know that they don't only look at infrastructure. But if I go back to misconception is yes, we are building infrastructure. We require it. But I want to attack Maslow's very good. Whatever the hierarchy of
needs.
The pyramid of needs. Maslow. Thank you. There's another guy from the medieval time that talked about farming. Anyway, so Maslow's needs, the hierarchy of needs. If we look at that was completely based on a single person in the 40s or 50s, so post-war, right? And he only looked at a sample of a very particular, not a diverse sample. So in a research base, it's kind of, we can just destroy it. However, until today, we're being told, like I attend meetings with marketing agencies, they're still talking about that. So if livability was applied to this hierarchy of needs, it would always look at those first two. Whereas indigenous people, right? There's another tribe that apparently, I don't know if this is true, but he spent time with the First Nations tribes, and then they had the self-actualization, which he argues you need to have your home, your safety,
your basic needs
met, and then you
go
up
able to reach that level.
To be able to then eventually, like once you're satisfied, your basic needs satisfied, then you can feel love, and then self-actualization is the last one. Whereas if you look at an indigenous approach, they flip that. So you are born with your divine right to feel self-actualized. So I wonder if we could do this in a built environment. Yes, you need to build the minimum, but what is minimum for you might not be minimum for me. So the three things because I reflected a little bit about it before coming here, I think we need, and I know the human rights guys, which doesn't have much teeth, right? How do you impose this in every city? But we need to have the right to mobility, right? How do we come and go? So to exercise our choice. We need to have a right to affordable housing, right? Whereas for the Emiratis, this is already secured in so many beautiful ways, but not that the rest of the world cannot enjoy this. So from a livability perspective, the other contexts really have an issue with affordability and public transport and so on. Whereas over here, why don't we get amazing points then for affordable housing? Because the complexity of the national separation between nationals and non-nationals. So it's not a large amount of people that can access that, and then so on. But infrastructure building has its place, but I think operationally we can do much more. In other words, instead of always accelerating huge, large-scale projects, why don't we? And I know you guys enjoy this, and I think this is part of your ethos.
But small interventions.
Small interventions, exactly.
Like shade and comfort.
Just do like many things.
We're bringing that conversation back,
right? And then
it's very important.
When we're not saying infrastructure is not important, of course it is, but it serves a purpose. But then this also serves a purpose, but it's lacking here.
Yeah, so many things, and New York did that massive thing in Times New Square, right? So that's a massive, like we could do something like this, right?
Definitely.
But what you see, which is like, okay, even Brazil did every Sunday, they give a
in
whole...
Sao Paulo, right?
In Sao Paulo, exactly. Every Sunday
it's like a major thoroughway in the middle of the city. They close it and it's just pedestrians and people on bikes.
It becomes a public space, becomes like a concrete park.
That's what they do as well in Tokyo. They closed down all the main roads.
The main
We're talking
roads.
about main highways in the weekends and completely pedestrianized them.
Yeah.
And they've got their local markets and a whole different community events that are just set up over the weekend. It's such a, I mean, I haven't been, but my sister was recently in Tokyo and she was telling me about this experience. And she was like, it was so surreal because it was like suddenly you feel like the city is being given back to the people.
That's right.
And they're able to, you know, feel like they own those spaces, and that it creates that sense of belonging.
Absolutely.
And
that's
it's
existing.
so empowering, yeah.
It's existing infrastructure, which in some ways we could argue they're obsolete already. Asphalt, like serving the vehicular, right?
Yeah.
Movement.
100%.
We are covering the
Who
land.
else is it serving? It's heating up the city. It's
Heating it
not,
up,
not
exactly.
safe for pedestrians or
And
kids.
it's very just one use.
Yes.
No.
It's just, yeah.
So all of that I would argue now, going back to livability. So couldn't livability also be a massive operational upgrade? So if architects and built environment professionals were put in a place that they needed to innovate because the constraints were so high, meaning you cannot start building any new thing unless you double check every existing built like brown infrastructure available before you can build something else.
I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like if it would put an onus on the designer, it would put an onus on the client and also the government, right?
100%.
So
And for us, we're always, I feel like we as architects or urban designers, we always love a greenfield site because we feel like we can start something new and make it perfect and do it right the first time.
I think that's a major
and we
misconception.
and we forget about all the brownfield sites because it's more of a challenge. And so this is actually maybe something as professionals we need to also double down on. It's you have an existing city. There's so much you can do with it for less price or less cost.
Yeah.
And basically like doing improvements to operationalize the existing infrastructure and utilizing it.
But that's what urban planning is anyway all about. It should be based off of that. I think that's also like a
big time.
A common misconception.
Yeah.
So the fashion world does really well with these pop-ups, right?
Yeah.
So they do pop-ups. They use like something temporary, right? And also the new generations don't want to necessarily be homeowners anymore. They don't want to do like all service-led, right? So convenience, service. We could apply this to a way of living as well and do pop-ups that would experiment. And then we go to data collecting.
Tactical urbanism.
Tactical urbanism. So you spend some time like, can I test the closure of this major thoroughfare on Sundays only? I'm not saying we need to be practical. People, there's a whole, there's complex needs in the city, but how can we test things in the weekend, right? And see, and then collect the data and then go back to something that I believe in, which is evidence-based advice as an expert, right? To leadership, advice to my director, to policy making, right? So how do you measure the success of anything that you propose without having some sort of data set, even if it's observational, even if it's just a survey afterwards, or doing focus groups? We haven't been trained, even though we have a huge responsibility to the way in which we decide the land use. We haven't been trained on how to observe people from and we are all biased. There's no such thing as an unbiased. I know anthropologists think so, but we're all biased. We all have a position, in terms of positionality. But what if we were able to really bring together how people relate to space without assuming that we can represent them? So I have an issue with representability as well. How am I to represent Emirati women in my research? I'm not representing them. I am giving a space for a conversation to happen, which is what's happening here with us.
Yeah, totally.
You guys are allowing me to voice some of my, my worries, some of my reflections, professional reflections with you. And we need this conversation to really spread, because it needs to raise awareness. It starts with our kids, right? So it needs to go to school. What is the responsibility we have with the planet when we transfer the land use of a city, right? So there is a virgin land there, and then suddenly it's an asphalt. Can we get back? It's very, very impractical, or it's very unlikely that we're going to demolish things. But we can change the use of things very quickly with tactile urbanism and with the support of the community, and then bring people together. Really, so it's about fast accelerating these pop-up ideas, test it, and see how we can transfer this as a solid, version
and
of the city.
And on that topic in specific, can you share an example where human insight and community input has actually changed the course of a design outcome? Can you think of an example to share?
I can think like something that I I lived here, in my experience, we have changed. It's very, very small, but I think in the small details, maybe we can, we can find solutions. So when you have a designer, a landscape architect or a designer putting together a plan, a proposal for a park, they might forget. I'm not saying this has happened, right? But let's say hypothetically, they maybe suggested, because they like football, they put football pitches in this. In this park, but the population living in that particular
they being
community,
who, the planners?
No, the landscape architect. So the designer, the built environment professional.
I love that, by the way, the built environment professionals.
Yeah.
It's like really just,
like just everybody, all of
amalgamating
us.
all of us.
Yeah, like engineers, project managers, architects. So all of us have a role, right? We go and we put, I'll just put football because that's what I like. I watch every week.
He assumes that's what people would want because that's what he likes. Yeah.
100%. So what happens?
He assuming it's a man.
Because exactly. Women wouldn't have done that. No, we would sometimes. But anyway, so then we go to the community, and the majority are, let's say, Filipino nationals. Do they play football? No, they play basketball.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying every national of Philippines plays. I'm just giving you.
But I think the point you're touching on is so important. The fact that these planners sit behind their desks and make decisions for the community without ever having. Exactly. Without even asking one person living there, what would you like to see in a park? Yeah, but we have done mini little checks, and we have done certain, ways of like, what is the preference? We can count. Again, I don't know what the representability is, right? I can never assume, but it's something. It's better than not having asked, right? Yeah. So then we are over here. And what happens with data collection when we consult, it's a form of consultation, is that the softwares tend to take roles that they shouldn't, meaning I will, let's say sentiment analysis. I was talking to a company, and they were presenting their ideas, and they lack this collaboration with someone who can actually create the correct questions. Like, it's not about the digital twins. It's not about the surveys. It's about who's asking the question and why. So we need to be more critical.
What kinds of questions as well are being asked.
Yes. Yeah. What is the question? Yeah. Exactly. So if I, as a designer, doesn't even cross my mind that perhaps I should know what kind of demographics I have in this space, so I can cater for them and then create an urban infrastructure that supports that, or just paint over it, right? Remember the tactile, like something. It's not about constant high scale efforts. It's in the small details. Sometimes you can really make huge changes,
And permanent as well in the long term.
Permanent,
totally. You pilot it, and if it works, it's successful, you scale up.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to talk about a hot topic, of course, AI. That seems like it's, integrated into all facets of our lives. Digital twins, smart data. How can we ensure that cities, when they apply things like AI and technology, that we ensure emotional intelligence and real human experience remain at the core?
I don't think. No, I think. Super hard question as well. But I think AI is as good as what we feed it, right? So the quality of the questions, but also the quality of the data. Yeah. There's
But no, what you just said also, like right before this, makes a lot of sense. It's what are you asking AI? And if you ask something, you're already kind of preempting or predicting what the answer will be. So
and you can use it. I mean, we can lie with statistics, and we can also lie with AI in a way that we can make it. We can make it so biased, right? Sure. In a way that then it only serves what my own mindset 100%.
Is. 100%. Like you're talking to a mirror.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And that's what I think. We shouldn't be worried. I love AI for so many different things, and it's about asking. Like, I still need a huge critical thinking sense. I need backing up for me to even start prompting. So, and then I have to prompt the prompt. I have to be like, okay, now question, now answer from the complete opposite perspective. So it's about if you use AI as any other tool, any other software, the issue is usually not with the software, right? With the technology. Technology is great. So they used in Rio, this is not new, maybe 20 years old. They were modeling. So what AI can contribute is just processing a large, humongous amount of data in a unrealistic amount of time, which is what this is brilliant for cities with the level of complexity that we have to think about, like the layers, you know, and everything. So in Rio, they used AI, I guess. I don't know now. I'm not going to say the name of the companies, but the government engaged with digital twin, and they were able to monitor and predict. I think AI is brilliant for predictions, right?
Yeah.
So they make use of data sets that we can't even comprehend, right? And then have a projection. But again, the quality of our question needs to be super. So, you know, the prediction is realistic. But in Rio, but going back, they were able to predict which areas were going to be submerged by water.
Wow.
Because we, unfortunately, in Rio de Janeiro, you have favelas, right? So they are built in unstable soil, and then when it rains, you have torrential rains. What happens? They come down. You know, there's a massive floods. So they were able to measure the floods.
Wow.
So I think this kind of modeling, again, you can use technology, you can use all of it as long as it's in service for the community, is in service of for the planet, right? Like it's in service, and usually it's at the moment you might not have that happening, right?
Not yet, at least.
Not yet. Yeah. So again, there's a huge space and power of regulations. So I believe in government regulating certain,
100%,
access to data. So there's a lot of protection that needs to happen for privacy issues, obviously. So it's the amount of data that can be processed that is fascinating for me. So when we have our huge data sets, I'm able to look at that and think, how can I even comprehend? I'm transcribing my interviews, right? I'm still transcribing from my PhD. Yeah. And I have to listen to them over and over again. So, 1 hour interview can take 20 hours of this, like,
because you're debunking, you're analyzing.
And then you have to go. So, we have brilliant brains. Like AI doesn't get close to us, but it can process just amounts. It's about speed. It's about processing time. That's it. It's more about efficiency.
Yeah.
But did I answer?
You answered perfectly. Yeah. But looking ahead, Olivia, what 3 small-scale interventions could instantly boost livability in cities like Abu Dhabi or Dubai, especially for youth, working women, or underrepresented communities?
Okay, I think Abu Dhabi, we really need public transport.
Okay.
Agile public transport, actually. So I'm not talking about, again, if we're going to...
What do you mean by agile public transport?
Yeah, so I saw something in Dubai, like bus on demand.
Oh, yeah.
I think this is fantastic.
Yes.
So you can start, again, very kind of quick, like map out in the most kind of dense districts. Let's do some pilots. Listen, we need to verify the level of service. So what happens with public transport, you need capacity, right? Yeah. So you need a minimum population trigger. And that's what happens usually in any context. When you go away from the city centers, you have less quality service.
And you have less density.
Less density, so it doesn't justify, you can't pay. It's not commercially viable, right? To go to more remote areas. But we could start in Abu Dhabi Island. There's enough people that we can have more agile. So when I say public transport...
And within also national housing neighborhoods, I believe.
Yes, but then there's a culture shift that needs to happen. So if you think about it, even in London, it's not as cool to take the bus as the tube. Yeah. You live there, so you tell me. But there's a stigma. Typically,
it's crazy.
There's a stigma with buses. So I would, if it was up to me, I would create an immense, marketing campaign with teenagers. So we need to start them young.
Yes.
It's so cool to get the public transport. It's amazing to get on the bus. And then if people had the information associated with every single life choice they have. Yeah. Hey, if you choose today to drink more water and I don't know what, and if you choose today to what is the impact on your health about water? But if you choose today to take the bus instead of going on a car, just these many things
backed by incentives as well.
With incentives, so so the government needs to start subsidizing
fees. That told you by taking this bus, you've, for example, saved this amount of CO2 emissions.
And you're contributing to your community, right? Yeah. So there's all of this constant feedback.
Imagine if we had an app that tracked how we moved and it would reward people.
Yes,
exactly.
Gamification.
Using public transport, exactly.
Yeah. So technology is there. Yeah. It's all there. We're not saying something that hasn't been thought about, but it's just who can implement this and operationalize. So that would be one. I think mobility, we need a lot of adoption by people. So it's user behavior too. It's not, let's not always blame the system, right? So people are not using it as well. So it's complex because it's not about building more bus stops.
This is the two-way street. So you can have the infrastructure, but then it's how do you motivate and incentivize the people to actually utilize the operational aspects.
The operational, which I keep going back to. So it's about the quality of the bus, how often the bus is going to come, right? So the quality of the service, how convenient it is in the connection. So it's about this intermodality. So you're on the bus, you go, and then you wait for it in a air-conditioned bus stop. How do you expect people to go from the air-conditioned bus stop and walk for 2 kilometers in this heat?
Yeah.
So we need the
first
urban
last
design
mile connection
yes,
is so important.
all of this first mile. How do you call this? That's
first last mile.
First last mile connection. So in the UK, they do a lot of research about cycling, right? So how are they going to incentivize? So how long is the people's willingness to cycle?
Yeah.
Right.
So
if it's like a little bit, they based on research and so on, but
course.
they interview again. They spend time observing, but it's very interesting. How would we do this for this context? Is it about shade? Right. Again, can we pilot something quickly? Like let's just
we need to study what the behavioral nudges are for people and actually start applying that into design. You know. Yeah.
And I thought about doing this for my son's school. I wanted to. How do we start in the school level, right, with kids, like explaining to them that it's not okay for us to drop you every single day. So emotionally, it's better for children.
Yeah.
Right? But how do we explain that maybe you have to also be aware that, yes, it's hot, but why can't we sweat here a bit more? Why can't we just, like, what do you expect? You're going to be like, you're not in Canada in the winter, right? Like, we're not okay with even like the way our bodies react. So then I talked to the kids, and even the kids are saying, no, it's too hot, I'm going to sweat. Okay, it's okay, we'll sweat. So get on the bike, sweat a bit.
It's 40 degrees, it's almost a sweat.
You know, so like how do we
normalize? You have to accept the fact. This is the context.
Right? So how do we normalize this, like these movements in the city?
It's conversation, narratives, it's rewiring, reconditioning.
Yeah.
Reconditioning
but
and repackaging.
It's also a dangerous, because who's leading those conversations? So if it's bottom up, if it's bottom down, I'm not sure. But if you think of, I'm going to talk about schools as well. They create a very politically correct environment where you should be kind, and these are your emotions. And then the kids are like feeling, in the safe space. The city is not as, emotionally safe as this environment. So I'm just also intrigued, and I don't have the answer, but I'm intrigued on how much do you tell people, because there is like an overwhelming amount of information that can just become noise.
True.
So it needs to be very targeted, and I think if we go to livability, is about how do you move, where do you live, how do you achieve self-realization? Like, does that mean that if you're already in touch with yourself, like, with nature, if you obviously, have a good enough childhood, none of us do, but like a good enough that you've received enough love, how can you move forward and then make the right choices? As a community member.
Olivia, thank you so much for joining us. Really, what
you.
insights!
As always with
thank
this
you for
one.
sharing them. Honestly, not one boring moment with you. It's been a meaningful conversation on what it truly means to design livable, inclusive cities in the Gulf. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow us on Instagram at ARKAT.ae and subscribe on YouTube or Spotify for more. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Olivia, so much.
Thanks, guys. That was awesome.